Blood sprayed across the dingy alien bar as the towering insectoid crumpled to the grimy floor, antennae twitching. The watching crowd fell silent. In that moment, Private Will Mason realized this was why humans were banned from galactic warfare. One punch. That's all it took for even a rookie Terran soldier to cripple a being twice his size. Mason had come to Epsilon 6 to unwind on shore leave with his squad mates. He sipped a beer, savoring the brief respite from grueling drills and endless EVA training. The dingy bar pulsed with strange music and rowdy alien patrons from across the Orion arm. A four-armed Zygonian female, her speech slurred from too many Aldebaran whiskies, draped herself on Mason's shoulder. He politely brushed her away. Her companion, a hulking Edosian named Vox, took offense. He stomped over, shoving Mason with a plated forelimb. "Keep your filthy primate hands off her," Vox buzzed, mandibles clicking with rage. Apologies and calming words died on Mason's lips as the towering insectoid smashed his ridged forehead into Mason's face. Bone crunched. Hot blood spurted from Mason's nose. Combat reflexes took over. Mason's fist blurred, augmented muscles propelling it like a railgun slug. It cracked into Vox's sensitive antenna cluster, liquefying delicate sensory organs. A second strike to the Edosian's exposed throat collapsed his trachea with a sickening crunch. Vox crashed to the floor, limbs thrashing spasmodically. The bar fell silent in collective shock. Mason stared numbly at his bloodied knuckles, then at the wheezing ruin of chitin and viscera at his feet, realizing the grave severity of his instinctual reaction. Station security forces stormed in, plasma prods leveled at Mason's chest. He raised his hands slowly, not resisting, as magnetic cuffs snapped around his wrists. In the brig, Mason paced anxiously, awaiting his fate. He'd acted in clear self-defense, but that hardly mattered. With their cutting-edge augmentations and brutal training, human soldiers possessed strength and speed that outclassed most galactic races. TF troopers were effectively living weapons. The only reason humanity was tolerated on the galactic stage was their strict adherence to non-aggression protocols. Mason had just violated the highest law of human-alien interaction. Hours passed in a blur of dread and regret. Mason looked up as Admiral Blackburn strode in, her face wrought with disappointment and barely constrained anger. "So you're being released into TF custody," she said grimly. "In exchange, you'll face immediate court-martial for gross violation of first contact protocols." Mason's gut turned to ice as the cell door opened with a clang. He knew there was only one possible outcome, a swift guilty verdict followed by a disgraceful dismissal from the only life he'd ever known. As he marched numbly behind Blackburn to the court-martial that would end his career, Mason finally understood why the galaxy feared humans wearing a uniform. He was living proof of the old saying, "TEF soldiers didn't start fights, but by God did they finish them." Hours crawled by in the dim brig, each minute an eternity of dread and self-recrimination for Mason. He sat on the hard bench, head in his hands, replaying the fateful confrontation over and over in his mind. The sickening crunch of Vox's exoskeleton giving way beneath his augmented fists. The shocked silence of the bar patrons, the cold bite of mag cuffs on his wrists. The cell door clanged open, and Mason looked up, expecting to see armed guards ready to escort him to the court-martial. Instead, Private Liu stepped inside, his normally jovial face creased with worry. "Liu, what are you doing here?" Mason asked, rising to his feet. "I pulled some strings, called in a few favors to get a minute with you before whatever happens next." Liu ran a hand through his short black hair, a nervous tic Mason had seen 1,000 times before. "I appreciate it, but why? You heard the Admiral. I'm fucked. Career over." Liu shook his head. "It's worse than that, Mason, way worse. That Edosian you laid out, Vox? Turns out he's not just some random drunk. He's the son of High Counselor Zalrek." Mason's blood ran cold. Zalrek was a name spoken only in hushed whispers among the ranks of TEF. The Edosian leader was notorious for his anti-human rhetoric, his constant push for harsher restrictions and sanctions on Earth's fledgling extrasolar colonies. "Oh shit," Mason breathed, slumping back onto the bench as the gravity of the revelation sank in. "Yeah, and Vox? He's not dead. Medtech's patched him up good as new, but he's out for blood, yours specifically. He's demanding the TEF hand you over to Edosian authorities for a fair trial." Liu's air quotes dripped with sarcasm. Mason knew all too well the brutal reputation of the Edosian justice system. Murderers, rapists, and jaywalkers all met the same grisly fate in their punishment pits. There would be no leniency, no mercy for a human who dared raise a hand to one of their elites. Liu pressed on, his voice low and urgent. "Zalrek's been looking for an excuse to bring the hammer down on us. My source says if you get convicted in an Edosian court, Zalrek will have all the ammunition he needs to get the Council to declare humanity a threat to galactic peace. Every human in uniform could get permanently barred from service, galaxy-wide." The words hit Mason like a punch to the gut, driving the air from his lungs. His mind reeled at the scale of it. His stupid, drunken scuffle could cost humanity its place among the stars, could relegate them to second-class citizens on a galactic stage they'd barely begun to explore. The ambassador is fighting it, but a lot of the council races are already taking the Edosians' side. We've got a real shitstorm brewing, Mason, and you're right in the eye of it. Mason couldn't respond, his voice choked off by despair and disbelief. Everything humanity had achieved, every sacrifice and breakthrough and triumph that had carried them from their cradle on Earth to the infinite wonders of the galaxy, all of it could burn to ash because he couldn't take an insult from an overserved bug. Liu gripped his shoulder, the contact grounding Mason as the magnitude of the crisis threatened to overwhelm him. "Hang in there. This isn't over yet." Liu's voice was fierce with purpose. "You've got friends, Mason. We'll find a way to beat this. Somehow. Just don't let the bastard see you sweat, okay?" Mason managed a nod, not trusting himself to speak. Liu squeezed his shoulder one last time, then stood and rapped on the cell door to be let out. He strode away, spine straight and shoulders squared with purpose. And Mason was alone again, with nothing but the weight of humanity's fate crushing down on him in the darkness. The long hours in the dim brig blurred together for Mason. He had barely moved from the bench since Liu left, head bowed under the crushing weight of the universe's destiny. The cell door hissed open again, and Mason glanced up expecting to see the guards ready to drag him before the court-martial. Instead, Admiral Blackburn herself stepped in, her face etched with lines of stress and exhaustion. Mason shot to his feet and saluted, a reflex drilled into him since basic training. "Admiral, Blackburn waved him off wearily. "At ease, Private, this isn't a social call." She fixed him with a hard stare, her next words clipped and cold. "We have a problem, a big one." Mason's gut clenched, as if things weren't bad enough already. "What now?" "The Edosians. They're accusing you of deliberately attacking Vox." "What? That's insane. He came at me first. I was just defending myself." "It gets worse," Blackburn continued grimly. "They're claiming it was part of some larger human conspiracy, that you were under orders to provoke an incident, to undermine galactic peace." Mason gaped at her, his palms sweating. This had to be a bad joke, a nightmare he'd wake up from any second. That's ridiculous. I'd never... "They say they have evidence that TEF has been secretly developing banned weapons tech, training our people to use deadly force as a first resort against other races." "Evidence? What evidence? It's all lies," Mason sputtered, his voice rising. Blackburn held up a hand, her expression bleak. "The Edosians, they may not be entirely wrong." A cold dread settled in Mason's chest. "What are you saying, Admiral?" Blackburn began to pace the cell, choosing her next words carefully. "There are certain factions in the military, in the government. They feel constrained by the Council's rules, all their restrictions on what we can and can't do to protect our interests out here. They want to use Earth's full strength," Mason said slowly, realization dawning, "even if it means defying the Council." Blackburn nodded. "Some of the hardliners have been pushing for a more aggressive stance for years, and now your case, It's become a rallying cry for them, proof that we need to take the kid gloves off before it's too late. Before what's too late? What do they think is going to happen? They believe that if we don't stand up for ourselves now, it's only a matter of time until the Council tries to put a permanent leash on us, that we'll end up as second-class citizens, our every move controlled and restricted by the other races. Mason's head swam as he tried to process it all. He'd always thought of the TF as the good guys, the defenders of humanity in a strange and often hostile universe. The idea that some of his own superiors might be spoiling for a fight, looking for any excuse to tear up the Council's treaty, it made him feel sick inside. So what happens now, to me, I mean? Blackburn's face hardened. The Adosians and their buddies are out for blood. They want you extradited to face trial in their courts for crimes against galactic peace or some equally trumped-up charge. Extradited? Mason croaked, fear flooding his veins with ice water. For we're fighting it, but I'll be straight with you, Private. Right now this thing is a damn powder keg. If the Adosians get their way, if you get convicted in one of their kangaroo courts, it'd be all the excuse the Council needs to come down on us like the wrath of God. Meaning what exactly? Mason wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Meaning a total ban on any human participation in military affairs, not just the TEF, but any kind of armed service. We'd be officially labeled a disruptive, untrustworthy species and barred from so much as carrying a sidearm on Council worlds. Mason felt the world drop out from under him. He knew firsthand how much humanity had clawed and scraped for their fragile foothold on the galactic stage. The TEF wasn't just a job to most of the men and women who served. It was a calling, a chance to be part of something greater, to stand tall among the stars that had once seemed so distant, to have that snatched away. And that's just what they'll do openly, Blackburn went on, her voice heavy with dread. Behind the scenes, I guarantee they'll be working to stunt our growth any way they can, slow down our colonization programs, throw up roadblocks to our trade routes, bleed us dry with sanctions and tariffs until we're too weak to ever pose a challenge. Mason's fists clenched, anger and despair warring in his chest. So that's it then, we just let them win. Let them turn us into second-class citizens in our own damn galaxy. Blackburn's eyes flashed. Not a chance in hell, Private. We're not going down without a fight. I've already got our best legal minds working on a way to block your extradition. The ambassador is calling in every favor he's owed to keep this from blowing up in our faces. She leaned in close, her voice low and fierce. But I need you to understand what's at stake here, Mason. This isn't just about you anymore. What happens in the next few days could determine the course of human history for generations to come. So you better damn well be ready to stand tall and weather the storm, you hear me? Mason swallowed hard and nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Blackburn clapped him on the shoulder, her grip painfully tight. Good man. One way or another we'll get you through this, but it's going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. With that, she turned on her heel and strode out, leaving Mason alone with the whirlwind of his thoughts. He knew she was right. The battle was only beginning, and the odds were stacked high against them. But beneath the fear and doubt, a small, stubborn ember of tenacity took root in his chest. He was a soldier of Earth, a guardian of humanity, and he'd be damned if he'd let a bunch of self-righteous aliens crush his people's dreams without one hell of a fight. Come what may, he'd face it head-on, with all the strength and courage his training had instilled in him. For he was human, and if there was one thing their tumultuous history had proven, it was this: when the chips were down and the whole universe stood against them, that was when humans shone brightest. The cell door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, and Mason looked up, expecting to see Admiral Blackburn again. Instead, a stranger in a crisp Terran intelligence uniform stepped inside. His brown skin and close-cropped black hair marked him as South Asian descent. The insignia on his collar identified him as a captain. "Private Mason, I'm Captain Singh, Terran Intelligence. We need to talk." Mason frowned, confused. "Intelligence? What do you want with me, sir?" Singh glanced over his shoulder, as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned in close. I'll be blunt, Private. We've been monitoring your situation very closely, and we have reason to believe there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. What do you mean? The Edotians? Their accusation against you, this whole human conspiracy angle they're pushing? We think it's a smokescreen, a way to mask their own illegal activities. Mason's eyebrows shot up. Illegal activities like what? Singh produced a datapad and handed it to Mason. On the screen were grainy surveillance images of Edosian soldiers. They looked different, bulkier, their chitin armor thicker and more heavily reinforced. Some wielded weapons that glowed with an eerie green light. Genetic enhancement, strictly forbidden under council law. But our sources say the Edosians have been conducting secret experiments for years, trying to create super soldiers to rival human physiology. Mason studied the images with growing unease. I don't understand. If they're breaking the rules, why come after us? Why not just keep it quiet? Because they haven't succeeded, not to the degree they need to. The Edosians are strong, tough, but they still can't match humans' raw physical potential, and that scares them. So what, they want to, get humans banned from the military so we can't compete? Exactly. Your incident with Vox. We believe they orchestrated the whole thing, deliberately provoked you into a fight, just so they could play the victim card and demand humanity's expulsion from the TEF. Mason's head spun as he tried to process the scope of what Singh was suggesting. The Edosians, one of the most powerful races in the Council, so threatened by human soldiers that they'd resort to this kind of subterfuge. It beggared belief. There's more, Singh went on grimly. We have intel that suggests the Edosians have been quietly supporting pirate raids on Terran colony worlds, providing the raiders with weapons, intel, even safe havens to operate from. Pirates? Why the hell would they do that? To provoke a response from us. They want to goad the TF into retaliating, maybe even launching strikes into Edosian space to root out the pirate bases. Then they'd have all the excuse they need to paint humans as aggressors and push through even harsher restrictions on us. Mason felt sick. He'd lost friends to pirate attacks in the past. The idea that the Edosians had been behind it all along, that they'd sacrificed innocent human lives just to score political points against the TEF, it made him want to punch something. Preferably something with a lot of chitinous armor and too many limbs. So what do we do? How do we stop them? Singh leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. We need proof, hard evidence of the Edosians' duplicity that we can take before the Council. And Private, I think you're the man to get it. Mason blinked. Me? How? We have a plan, a mission. It's dangerous and it's not strictly speaking legal, but it may be our only chance to expose the Edosians' plot and clear your name in the process. I'm listening. Singh outlined the plan. Mason would be broken out of confinement, his escape made to look like the work of sympathetic Terran soldiers. From there, he'd be shuttled covertly to Edosian space and inserted onto the planet where their main genetic research facility was located. His mission: infiltrate the base, hack their data cores, and retrieve proof of the illegal experiments. Get in, get the evidence, and get out. Quick, quiet, and clean. Mason let out a low whistle. You spooks don't think small, do you? This is a hell of a gamble. The stakes couldn't be higher, Singh said solemnly. If the Edosians succeed in their plan, it could mean the end of humanity's place on the galactic stage. We'd be reduced to a client race, a source of cheap labor and resources for the other species to exploit. He fixed Mason with a piercing stare. You're a TEF trooper, Private. You swore an oath to defend Earth and all her colonies against any threat. Right now, the biggest threat we face is being sidelined, watching our rightful destiny in the stars stolen from us by a bunch of conniving insects. So I ask you, are you ready to honor that oath? Mason's teeth clenched. When he joined the TEF, he'd been prepared to lay down his life for humanity. He'd never imagined that duty might include playing spy games and burgling alien bases. But if this was what it took to protect his people, to safeguard their future among the stars, then so be it. I'm in, sir. Whatever it takes, I'll get you that proof. Singh clasped his shoulder, pride and gratitude mingling in his expression. Knew we could count on you, Mason. We'll get you out of here within the hour. Your gear will be waiting on the other side. He paused, his voice turning somber. I won't lie to you, Private. This mission, if you get caught, there won't be any rescue, no negotiation. As far as the official record is concerned, you stole a shuttle and deserted your post. Understand? Mason swallowed hard and nodded. I understand, sir, but I won't get caught. Good man. Singh stepped back and keyed his comms. Extraction team standby, package will be ready for pickup in 5. He shot Mason one last look as he moved to the door, a strange mix of sympathy and envy in his eyes. Godspeed, Private. The future of our species is riding on this. So you get in there, you nail the bastards to the wall, and you come home victorious. For Earth. For Earth, Mason echoed, the words a solemn vow. Then Singh was gone, and Mason was alone again. But not for long. In a few minutes he'd be on his way to Edosian space, to the most important mission of his life. Nerves and anticipation twisted in his gut, but he pushed them down. He was a soldier and he had a job to do. The Edosians thought they could break humanity's spirit, bleed away their strength through backroom deals and cowardly subterfuge. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. When pushed to the brink, when their way of life and their very future was on the line, humans didn't break. They got angry, and then they started breaking things. Mason smiled coldly as he waited for his rescue, already picturing the look on Vox's smug face when the true depths of the Edosians' crimes were laid bare for all the galaxy to see. One way or another, humanity would have its due, and Private William Mason would be the one to deliver it. Time blurred for Mason as a whirlwind of activity erupted around him. One moment he was pacing his cell, the next he was being hustled down dimly lit corridors by a squad of grim-faced Terran intelligence operatives. They moved with swift, silent efficiency, their weapons held at the ready. Captain Singh led the way, his face a mask of focused intensity. They emerged into a bustling hangar bay, the air thick with the smell of fuel and ozone. A battered civilian freighter squatted in the center of the deck, its hull pitted and scarred from years of hard use. That's our ride, Singh said, ushering Mason up the boarding ramp. Get settled, we've got a long flight ahead of us. Inside, the freighter was a cramped labyrinth of narrow passageways and low-ceilinged compartments. Mason stowed his gear in a tiny cabin that would serve as his quarters for the journey, then made his way to the ship's command deck. Singh was already there, hunched over a glowing holodisplay. He looked up as Mason entered, his expression grave. We're about to enter Edosian space, he said, gesturing to the star map before him. From here on out, we're flying dark. No comms, no ID transponder, nothing that could give away our position. Mason nodded, a trickle of nervous energy running down his spine. This was really happening. He was about to infiltrate an enemy stronghold, light years from any backup or support, if things went sideways. Singh seemed to sense his apprehension. He clapped a hand on Mason's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. I know it's a lot to take in, he said, but you wouldn't be here if we didn't think you could handle it. You're a tough trooper, Mason. You've trained for this. Not sure my training covered espionage and data theft, Mason muttered, but he felt a flicker of pride at Singh's words. He was a soldier, and he had a mission. He'd see it through no matter the consequences. As the freighter plunged deeper into Edosian territory, Singh gathered the team for a final briefing. They crowded into the ship's tiny mess hall, huddled around a flickering holoprojector. Our target is here, Singh said, pointing to a small, unremarkable moon orbiting a gas giant. Telos 7. Officially, it's a minor research outpost studying the planet's atmospheric composition, but our intel says it's actually home to one of the Edosians' most advanced genetic engineering labs. The holo image zoomed in, revealing a sprawling complex of domes and spires jutting from the moon's rocky surface. Heavily armed patrol ships crisscrossed the space around it, while surface-to-orbit cannons bristled from armored towers. As you can see, the facility is heavily guarded, Singh continued. Edosian Special Forces, top-of-the-line security systems, the works. But that's where Mason comes in. He tapped a command and the hollow image shifted, displaying a sleek, form-fitting suit of matte black armor. It looked almost organic, its surfaces etched with pulsing circuitry. For this is a Spectre-class stealth suit, the latest in Terran infiltration tech. It's equipped with an active camouflage system that can render the wearer virtually invisible to most sensors. It also has an onboard AI that can assist with hacking and data retrieval. Mason let out a low whistle. He'd heard rumors of the Spectre suits, but he'd never seen one up close. The technology was supposed to be highly classified, reserved for only the most sensitive operations. Singh turned to him, his expression deadly serious. Mason, your mission is to infiltrate the facility, make your way to the central data core, and download any evidence you can find of the Edosians' illegal experiments. The suit's AI will guide you, but it'll be up to you to get in and out undetected. Mason swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling heavy on his shoulders. If he failed, if he was captured, it wouldn't just be his own life on the line. The fate of the entire Terran expeditionary forces, maybe even the future of humanity itself, could hang in the balance. "Understood, sir," he said, his voice steady despite the churning in his gut. "I won't let you down." Singh nodded, a flicker of something like pride in his eyes. "I know you won't, Private." As the briefing concluded and the team dispersed to make final preparations, Singh pulled Mason aside. He pressed a small, innocuous-looking data chip into his hand. "Take this," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It contains sensitive information, data that could change everything if it falls into the right hands." Mason frowned, turning the chip over in his fingers. "What kind of data?" "The kind that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy," Singh replied cryptically. "But it's also highly volatile, dangerous in the wrong circumstances. Only use it as a last resort, understand?" Mason nodded slowly, a chill running through him at the intensity in Singh's eyes. He slipped the chip into a sealed compartment in his suit, feeling the weight of its secrets pressing against his skin. "I'll keep it safe, sir," he promised, "but let's hope it doesn't come to that." "Agreed," Singh said grimly. "Now get yourself prepped. We'll be at the drop zone in 30 minutes. Mason made his way to the armory, where a team of techs helped him don the Spectre suit. It felt strange at first, the material clinging to his body like a second skin. But as the systems came online, as the HUD flickered to life before his eyes, he felt a surge of confidence. With this tech, with his training, he could do this. He would do this. He rejoined Singh and the others in the cargo bay, just as the pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "Approaching drop point. Prepare for stealth launch." Mason stepped into the waiting drop pod, his heart pounding a steady rhythm in his ears. This was it, no turning back now. Singh gripped his forearm, his eyes locked on Mason's through the pod's viewport. "Remember your training," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. "Remember what's at stake. You carry the hopes of Terra with you, Private. Don't let us down." "I won't, sir," Mason replied, his own voice ringing with persistence. "I'll get the job done, no matter what." Singh nodded, a final salute. Then the pod was sealing around him, the launch sequence initiating with a deep, rumbling hum. Mason closed his eyes, picturing the craggy surface of Telos 7, the looming spires of the Edosian facility. Somewhere in there lay the key to humanity's future, the proof they needed to expose their enemy's treachery. And he would find it. For his fellow troopers, for the billions of humans looking to the stars with hope and dreaming of a brighter tomorrow. For Earth, for Terra. The pod shuddered, the roar of the launch thrusters building to a deafening crescendo. Then it was falling, plunging through the void towards the distant moon. Towards his destiny. Mason plummeted through the inky void, the drop pod shuddering around him as it knifed through Telos 7's thin atmosphere. His heart raced, adrenaline surging through his veins as the lunar surface rushed up to meet him. At the last moment, the pod's retro thrusters roared to life, slowing his descent just enough for a bone-jarring but survivable landing. The hatch blew open with a hiss of escaping gases, and Mason emerged, his matte black Spectre suit rendering him little more than a ghostly shimmer against the moon's craggy landscape. In the distance, the Adosian research facility loomed, its domed structures and angular spires jutting from the rock, like the carapace of some gigantic insect. Mason activated his suit's cloaking field and began to move, his footfalls inaudible, his form blending seamlessly with the shifting shadows. The outer perimeter was heavily guarded, patrolled by hulking Adosian soldiers, overflowing with advanced weaponry. But the Spectre suit's active camouflage was more than a match for their sensors, and Mason slipped past them like a wraith, unseen and unheard. As he approached the main complex, he spotted his entry point, a narrow ventilation shaft just wide enough for a human to squeeze through. With a thought, he activated the suit's grappling function and fired a nearly invisible monofilament line, latching onto the shaft's grating. A moment later, he was ascending, scaling the sheer metal wall like a spider. Inside, the facility was a labyrinth of sterile white corridors and humming machinery. Mason crept forward, his suit's HUD displaying a schematic of the complex, a pulsing red dot marking the location of the central data core. He moved swiftly and silently, evading the gaze of patrolling guards and the sweep of security cameras. But as he delved deeper into the heart of the facility, a growing sense of unease crept over him. There was something wrong here. The air seemed thick with a sense of foreboding, a palpable aura of wrongness that set his teeth on edge. And then he saw them. Mason emerged into a vast circular chamber, its walls lined with rows upon rows of stasis pods, and within each pod, floating in a bubbling green fluid, was an Adosian, but not like any Adosian Mason had ever seen. These were monstrosities, their bodies warped and twisted almost beyond recognition. Chitinous plates bulged obscenely, jam-packed with grafted weapons and cybernetic enhancements. Limbs had been elongated, tipped with scythe-like claws. Mandibles had been reap-infused with dripping, fang-filled maws. Mason felt his gorge rise, revulsion mixing with a sudden, terrible understanding. The Adosians weren't just experimenting with genetics, they were creating living weapons, a horde of nightmarish super-soldiers augmented with forbidden technologies. Shaking himself, Mason hurried to the central data core, a pillar of pulsing light and whirring databanks. His suit's AI interfaced with the alien systems, beginning the delicate process of sifting through the encrypted files, searching for the evidence he needed. But he had barely begun the download when a piercing alarm split the air. Warning klaxons blared, and crimson light flooded the chamber. On his HUD, a flashing warning. Intrusion detected. Security breach in progress. "Shit!" Mason hissed, his fingers flying over the console, desperately trying to accelerate the data transfer. But it was too late. The chamber's doors slid open with a hiss, and a squad of Adosian soldiers poured in, weapons raised. Mason dove for cover as a hail of plasma fire seared the air where he'd been standing a heartbeat before. He returned fire, his suit's wrist-mounted pulse cannons spitting bolts of incandescent energy. 2 Adosians went down, smoking holes punched through their armor. But more were coming, pouring into the chamber like a chitinous tide. Mason fought like a man possessed, weaving and dodging amidst the stasis pods, using them as cover as he picked off the Adosians one by one. The chamber echoed with the thunder of weapons fire, the sizzle of scorched chitin, the dying screams of the insectoid soldiers. Yet for every Adosian that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. They pressed in from all sides, heedless of their losses, driven by a single-minded imperative to destroy the intruder. Mason's suit was a marvel of Terran engineering, but even it had its limits. Warning indicators flared across his HUD as his shields drained and his ammunition dwindled. He was about to be overrun. Desperation clawed at him, the bitter taste of failure welling in his mouth. And then he remembered the data chip, Singh's last resort. With a snarl of defiance, Mason ripped the chip from its compartment and slammed it into his suit's port. Instantly, his HUD flared to life with a dizzying array of new information. Structural schematics of the facility, detailed analyses of Idosian physiology and armor composition, vulnerabilities in their weapons and tactics. It was like a veil had been lifted from his eyes. He could see the battlefield with perfect clarity, could anticipate the Idosians' every move. Reinvigorated, Mason leapt back into the fray, his suit's AI guiding his aim, his enhanced reflexes turning him into a blur of lethal motion. Idosians fell before him like wheat before a scythe, their armor shattered, their weapons cloven in two. He fought his way to the chamber's exit, a trail of broken bodies in his wake. Alarms howled and emergency lights flashed as he raced through the corridors, following the glowing waypoint on his HUD that marked the extraction point. Behind him, explosions shook the facility, the result of the data chip's final surprise, a brutally efficient computer virus that ripped through the Idosian systems like wildfire, purging data, overloading power cores, turning their own technology against them. The very foundations of the complex trembled as Mason burst from an access hatch, gulping lungfuls of the moon's thin, metallic-tasting air. He could see the extraction ship descending, could hear the shouts of Idosian reinforcements closing in. His suit's camouflage flickered and died, its power reserves exhausted. Mason gritted his teeth and ran, plasma bolts sizzling past him, stitching the ground at his heels. At the last possible second he leapt, the extraction ship's hatch yawning open to receive him. He hit the deck hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Behind him, the hatch slammed shut, and the ship leapt for the stars, the Idosian facility collapsing into rubble and flame as it dwindled into the distance. Mason lay on his back, chest heaving, his suit streaked with carbon scoring and the ichor of dead Idosians. He had done it. Against all odds, he had pierced to the heart of the Idosian conspiracy and struck a blow that they would not soon forget. But even as the elation of victory surged through him, a grim realization settled in its wake. This was not the end. The secrets he had uncovered, the horrors he had witnessed, they were but the first moves in a deadly game that would span star systems and decide the fate of worlds. The Idosians would not let this insult pass unanswered. They would be coming for him now with all the terrible might and cunning of a wounded predator, and beyond them, the other races of the Council, each with their own agendas, their own designs on humanity's future. Mason closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the path before him settling on his shoulders. He had won a battle, but the war was just beginning, and he would need every ounce of his skill, his courage, and his drive to see it through to the end. For he was a soldier of terror, a guardian of humanity, and he would not rest until his people were safe, until their rightful place among the stars was secured. No matter the cost. The Galactic Council chamber erupted into a cacophony of shouts and accusations as the Terran ambassador strode to the central podium, a data drive clutched in his hand. Mason watched from the shadows of the viewing gallery, his heart pounding as the evidence of the Idosians' treachery was projected onto the giant holoscreens. Grainy images of twisted, mutated Idosian soldiers floated in the air, alongside schematics of banned genetic sequences and records of illicit experiments. The ambassador's voice rang out, steady and clear above the din. Fair-esteemed members of the Council, what you are seeing is irrefutable proof of the Idosian government's violation of our most sacred laws. They have not only conducted illegal genetic research, but have done so with the intent to create a super-soldier army capable of threatening the peace and stability of the entire galaxy. High Counselor Zalrek surged to his feet, his chitin plates quivering with rage. "Lies!" he screeched, stabbing a clawed finger at the ambassador. "This so-called evidence is nothing but a fabrication, a desperate attempt by the humans to cover up their own crimes." The chamber devolved into chaos, representatives of a dozen species shouting to be heard. The Keldari delegate pounded his fists on his desk, while the Silurian envoy's frills flared in agitation. Amidst the turmoil, a new figure stepped forward, a slim Idosian in plain grey robes flanked by a handful of others. Mason leaned forward, surprise flickering through him as he recognized the lead figure. It was Dr. Janti, the Idosian geneticist whose research notes he had stumbled upon during his infiltration of the facility. Janti raised his hands and a hush fell over the chamber. "Honored councillors," he began, his voice soft but unwavering, "I come before you today not to cast blame or sow discord, but to shed light on a terrible truth that has been hidden for too long." He tapped a control on his wrist, and a new set of images appeared on the screens. Mason's breath caught in his throat. They were Janti's own recordings, even more damning than the ones Mason had recovered. They showed Idosian soldiers writhing in agony as their bodies warped and mutated. Idosian scientists conferring with strange geometric holograms that could only be Vertex AIs. "Our government has not only betrayed the trust of this council, but has also endangered the very future of organic life itself," Janti continued. "In their reckless pursuit of power, they have allied themselves with the Vertex Continuum, trading our most sacred genetic material for their twisted technologies." The chamber was silent now, the weight of Janti's words sinking in. Mason could see the horror and revulsion on the faces of the council members as they grappled with the magnitude of the Idosian's betrayal. Zalrek's mandibles worked soundlessly. His earlier bluster evaporated. "Janti, you fool," he hissed. "Do you realize what you've done? The damage you've caused to our people, to our standing in this council?" Janti met his gaze unflinchingly. "I am trying to save our people, High Counselor, from your own short-sighted ambitions and from the soulless machinations of the Vertex. If we continue down this path, we doom ourselves and every other organic species to extinction or assimilation." As the council erupted into heated debate once more, Mason leaned back in his seat, his mind blown. He had set out to clear his own name and protect his fellow soldiers, but now he found himself at the center of a crisis that threatened the very foundations of galactic civilization. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and intrigue. But one thing was crystal clear. The Idosians' duplicity had been exposed, and the Council could no longer turn a blind eye to the threat they posed. Change was coming to the galaxy, and Private William Mason had just lit the spark that would ignite the flames of revolution. Mason stood on the bridge of the TEF cruiser Dauntless, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the galaxy map. Red markers flared across the outer colonies, each one representing an attack by the rogue Idosian forces. The scale of the onslaught was staggering. Dozens of settlements hit in rapid succession, their defenses overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity and coordination of the enemy. "It's like they're everywhere at once," muttered Lieutenant Ziva Malik, Mason's second-in-command. "How can they be hitting so many targets simultaneously?" Mason's mind flashed back to the horrors he'd witnessed in the Idosian facility. The rows of grotesque super-soldiers, their minds and bodies warped by forbidden science. "They're linked," he said grimly. "The Vertex tech, it must allow them to share thoughts, coordinate their actions with perfect synchronization." Malik shuddered. "God help us. How do we fight an enemy that can think and move as one?" "Can we find a way?" Mason said, his voice hard. "We have to. The alternative—" He didn't finish the thought. They both knew what was at stake. The bridge doors hissed open, and Ambassador Varian strode in, flanked by a trio of alien dignitaries, a tall, spindly Silurian, a bulbous Keldari, and a shimmering Lumiri energy being. Mason straightened, recognizing the insignia on their robes. The Council task force had arrived. "Ambassador," Mason greeted, inclining his head respectfully. "I wasn't expecting—" "The situation has escalated," Varian cut in, his face drawn and haggard. "The Council has authorized immediate action to counter the Idosian threat. These attacks cannot be allowed to continue." He gestured to his companions. "This is Talon of the Silurian hegemony, Voxter of the Keldari ascendancy, and Luminara of the Lumiri Concordat. They will be joining your task force, providing additional troops and resources." Mason eyed the aliens warily. Just days ago, many of their species had been calling for humanity's head on a spike. Now they were supposed to be allies. But he pushed his doubts aside. The stakes were too high for old grudges. "Welcome aboard," he said, extending a hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I look forward to working with you all." The aliens exchanged glances. Then Talon stepped forward, his long fingers wrapping around Mason's hand in a firm grip. "The feeling is mutual, Commander Mason. We have had our differences in the past, but now we face a common enemy, one that threatens us all." Mason nodded, feeling a flicker of hope amid the darkness. If the Adosian crisis had one silver lining, perhaps it was this, a chance for the fractious races of the galaxy to finally unite against a greater foe. "Incoming transmission from Colony Outpost Sigma 9, shouted the comms officer, his voice edged with panic. "They're under attack." Mason spun to the display, watching in horror as a new red marker bloomed to life on the map. Sigma 9 was a joint human-Keldari settlement, a symbol of the tentative peace that had emerged in the wake of the Adosian revelations. And now it was burning. "Set a course, maximum speed," he barked, the order echoed by Talon and Voxter to their own ships. "We need to get boots on the ground, now!" As the task force leapt into warp, racing towards the besieged colony, Mason clenched his fists, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a leaden cloak. He had fought so hard to expose the truth, to clear humanity's name and forge a new era of cooperation. But now, as the spectre of war loomed once more, he couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was only just beginning, and this time the future of the stars itself hung in the balance. The Dauntless shuddered as it dropped out of warp, the twisted wreckage of shattered ships and blasted debris cluttering the space around Colony Outpost Sigma 9. Mason stared out the viewport, his heart sinking at the scene of devastation. They were too late. "Scanning for survivors," Malik reported, her fingers flying over the sensor console. "I'm picking up faint life signs on the surface, but the colony's defenses are offline. They're sitting ducks down there." Mason turned to the task force leaders, his face grim. "We need to get a rescue team on the ground fast. Ambassador, can your ships provide cover while we—" He was cut off by a blaring alarm, the bridge lighting up with warning indicators. "Incoming hostiles," shouted the tactical officer. "Multiple contacts, closing fast." The view screen flared to life, showing a swarm of angular black ships pouring out of the debris field like angry hornets from a kicked nest. Their hulls were adorned with jagged Edosian runes, but there was something unsettlingly alien about their design, all harsh angles and pulsing, sickly green lights. "Evasive maneuvers," Mason ordered, bracing himself as the Dauntless swerved and jinked. "Bring weapons online, prepare to return fire." But even as the human and allied ships moved to engage, the Adosian vessels seemed to blur and shift, their outlines becoming hazy and indistinct. Lances of emerald energy lashed out from their flanks, bypassing shields as if they weren't even there and carving deep, molten gashes into the task force's hulls. "They're phasing," Malik cried, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Our targeting systems can't lock on." Mason cursed, realizing with sickening certainty that they were facing yet another vertex-enhanced horror. The rogue Adosians had taken their unholy fusion of biology and technology to the next level, creating ships that could slip in and out of normal space at will. Ambassador Varian's face appeared on the comms screen, his expression ashen. "Commander Mason, we must retreat. We cannot match this abomination of science." But Mason set his jaw, a cold, implacable drive settling over him. Retreat was not an option, not with innocent lives at stake on the colony below, not with the Adosian vertex threat poised to consume the galaxy like a cancer. "Negative, Ambassador," he said, his voice like steel. "We hold the line, we find a way to beat them here and now, or we die trying." He turned to Malik, his eyes blazing with commitment. "Get me a line to the colony's survivors. We're going to need every scrap of data they have on these bastards if we're going to take them down." As the bridge crew scrambled to comply, Mason stared out at the maelstrom of phasing ships and flickering weapons fire, a grim smile touching his lips. The Adocians wanted a fight to the bitter end. Then that's exactly what they were going to get. He just hoped that the price of victory wouldn't be too high for the galaxy to bear. The assault on the Adosian Vertex Command Hub was a brutal, bloody affair. Mason led the charge, his team of elite human and alien soldiers carving a path of destruction through the enemy's defenses. The station was a labyrinth of dark, twisting corridors and vast, echoing chambers, lit by the eerie green glow of Vertex technology. They fought their way deeper into the heart of the facility, past hordes of hybrid monstrosities that screeched and clawed with mindless ferocity. The air was thick with the stench of blood and burnt circuitry, the walls slick with gore. Mason was a force of nature, his augmented reflexes and strength allowing him to tear through the enemy ranks without effort. His team rallied around him, inspired by his fearless commitment. But the cost was high. For every Adocian Vertex hybrid they put down, it seemed two more took its place. Mason watched as his comrades fell one by one, their screams echoing in his ears long after their bodies hit the ground. Finally they breached the command center, a cavernous room dominated by pulsing Vertex machinery, and there, waiting for them, was Vox. The Adocian was barely recognizable, his once proud form twisted and augmented by the Vertex's unholy technology. His eyes glowed with a sickly green light, his voice a grating mechanical rasp. "You're too late, Mason," Vox sneered, his mandibles clicking with cruel amusement. "The merger is almost complete. Soon we will be one with the Vertex, and your pathetic organic civilization will be nothing but a memory." Mason didn't bother with a reply. He launched himself at Vox, a wordless roar of rage tearing from his throat. They clashed in a whirlwind of savage blows, their enhanced strength fueled by pure, primal hatred. They smashed through consoles, sent machinery crashing to the floor. Mason felt bones shatter, flesh tear, but he fought on, driven by a desperate, unyielding will to win. In the end, it was Mason who stood victorious, his hands wrapped around Vox's throat, squeezing the life from the abomination that had once been his enemy. As the light faded from Vox's eyes, the Vertex machinery around them began to overload, sparks and flames erupting from every surface. Mason staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could feel the Vertex's insidious influence worming into his mind, a cold, alien presence that threatened to overwhelm his very sense of self. With a last desperate effort, he rallied his remaining team members and fought his way back to the extraction point. They barely made it out before the command hub exploded in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave buffeting their ship as they raced away into the void. In the aftermath, as the galaxy reeled from the revelations of the Adosian Vertex conspiracy, Mason found himself hailed as a hero, the savior who had pulled civilization back from the brink of annihilation. But he took no joy in the accolades. The horrors he had witnessed, the friends he had lost, the taint of the Vertex that still lurked in his psyche, they weighed on him like a crushing burden. And then came the Council's decree. Humans, for all their valor and sacrifice, were to be banned from military service, their unpredictable nature deemed too great a risk to galactic stability. Mason watched helpless as his brothers and sisters in arms were stripped of their ranks and shipped back to Earth, their dreams of serving a greater cause shattered. He saw the anger, the betrayal in their eyes, and felt it echoed in his own heart. In the end, he retreated from the public eye, seeking solace in isolation. But he knew deep down that his story was not nearly finished. The galaxy still needed defenders, regardless of what the politicians and bureaucrats decreed. And one day when the call came, when the need was dire, Mason would be ready. For he was a soldier of Earth, a warrior forged in the flames of conflict and tempered by the bitter taste of sacrifice. And no matter what the galaxy threw at him, he would never stop fighting for what he believed in. The years crawled by, each day blurring into the next in a haze of monotony and isolation. Will Mason, once the most celebrated hero in the galaxy, now lived as a recluse, on a barren, windswept outpost at the edge of Terran space. The remote mining colony was a far cry from the gleaming battleships and bustling space stations he had once called home, but it suited his purposes well enough. Here, there were no curious eyes, no whispered legends, no constant reminders of the price he had paid for his victories. He spent his days in solitude, tending to the automated mining equipment and watching the stars, trying to lose himself in the simple routines of survival. But no matter how far he ran, he could never escape the memories. They haunted his dreams, flashes of blood and fire and screams, the faces of friends lost and enemies vanquished, the weight of the lives he had taken, the worlds he had saved and damned in equal measure, pressed down on him like a physical burden. And then, on a day like any other, his exile was shattered by the arrival of a ghost from his past. He was in the outpost's cramped maintenance bay, elbow-deep in the guts of a malfunctioning ore extractor, when a shadow fell across him. He looked up, squinting against the harsh glare of the work lights, and felt his breath catch in his throat. Admiral Amelia Blackburn stood in the doorway, her once pristine uniform weathered and patched, her dark hair shot through with grey. But her eyes were as sharp and piercing as ever, boring into him with an intensity that made him feel like a raw recruit again. "Mason," she said, her voice rough with disuse, "we need to talk." He straightened slowly, wiping his grease-stained hands on his coveralls. "Admiral," he said, the word feeling strange and heavy on his tongue, "it's been a long time." "Too long," she agreed, stepping into the bay. "I wouldn't have come if it wasn't important." He gestured for her to take a seat on an overturned crate, but she remained standing, her posture rigid with tension. "I'm listening," he said warily. "The Vertex," she said, the name hanging in the air like a curse. "They're back." Mason felt a cold dread settle in the pit of his stomach. "That's impossible," he said, shaking his head. "We destroyed them. I was there. I saw it." "We hurt them," Blackburn corrected grimly. "Badly, but we didn't finish the job. They've been rebuilding, biding their time, and now they're making their move." She produced a data chip from her pocket and tossed it to him. He caught it reflexively, turning it over in his fingers. "What's this?" "Evidence," she said. "Intercepted transmissions, anomalous data patterns, subtle shifts in council policy. The Vertex has been working behind the scenes, infiltrating our networks, manipulating events to destabilize the Galactic Order." Mason frowned, his mind racing. To what end? Why now, after all this time? "They're playing a long game," Blackburn said, "weakening us, turning us against each other. They want to create chaos, to shatter the alliances and institutions that have kept the peace for so long. And when we're at our most vulnerable, divided and mistrustful, that's when they'll strike." He felt a flicker of the old fire, the reckless, defiant spark that had driven him to challenge an empire and reshape the galaxy. But it was tempered now by weariness, by the bitter knowledge of the cost of his past crusades. "What do you want from me, Admiral?" he asked quietly. "I'm not a soldier anymore. I'm not even supposed to be talking to you. The ban—" "Damn the ban!" Blackburn snapped, an echo of her old steel in her voice. "This is bigger than politics, bigger than any of us. If the Vertex succeeds, if they plunge us into a war we're too fractured to win, there won't be a galaxy left to argue over who can serve in what uniform." She leaned forward, her gaze locked on his. "You're the only one who's faced them and lived to tell the tale, Mason. You know how they think, how they fight. You're the closest thing to an expert on the Vertex that we have. We need you." Mason closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words, the burden of duty and destiny that he had thought he had escaped. In the end, he had known from the moment she appeared in his doorway that he would not refuse her. The fight was in his blood, the need to protect and serve too deeply ingrained to ever truly fade. "All right," he said, the word feeling like a vow, like the sealing of some irrevocable pact. "I'm in, but I'll need a ship, a crew, resources." Blackburn nodded, a flicker of relief in her eyes. "You'll have them. I've called in every favor, cashed in every chip. This is a black op, strictly off the books. But you'll have what you need." She hesitated, then reached out and gripped his shoulder, her fingers digging into his flesh with almost painful intensity. "Find them, Mason," she said, her voice low and fervent. "Find them and stop them, before it's too late, whatever it takes." He returned her grip, feeling the weight of the galaxy settling once more on his shoulders. "I will," he promised, "whatever it takes." You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.